Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you most cordially here at the VCon at HELLER. It's great that you're here. I hope you had no problems dialing in, and I hope you can hear us well. My name is Volker Bröhr. I'm an editor-in-chief of the MAV magazine from the Conradin Publishing House, and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. Now, we're talking about the transformation of global value-added chains, influences from politics and the economy. That's a very current topic. It's a big topic. And there is a long-term background to it. It's an interesting topic, and that's why it's great that we have two experts here. Here is Professor Dr. Mathias Weigold. He's the head of the Institute of Production Management, Technology and Machine Tools at the Technical University of Darmstadt, PTW. And Manfred Maier, member of the management board of HELLER. So a lot of theoretical and practical expertise here on the panel. Operative skills and academic skills, and I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. But before we begin, let me explain to you that you are muted here as the viewers, but you can still ask questions. You can post questions and messages in the chat, and I can come back to these and introduce them to the discussion. So, if it should happen that not all of your questions can be answered for time reasons, you can always contact our experts here directly during the VCon. Well, transformation of global value-added chains. Professor Weigold, why do these value-added chains change? Why is it so important to talk about this change right now? Can you tell us about all the challenges that are associated with that? Well, thanks. Of course, I will do that. Now, from my point of view, and also from the point of view of an expert committee which published a study in February, March this year, and this committee is called the High-Tech Forum. Now, they describe a picture of the digital transformation. So, because of this digital transformation, classic value-added chains will change. They will turn into value-added networks. What does this mean? New actors, new partners join this network, and we know this already now because what we see, or whom we see as new partners, are the platforms, the platform providers. Now, these will intervene with value-added chains, turn them into networks. And where do they come from, after all? In the VDI News, we were able to read some figures at the beginning of the year, and these large platforms come from the USA and from China. That's Amazon, that's Microsoft, and it's Alibaba. Now, very interesting question that we're covering here. So that is one thing. But the other thing is, what does this mean for those involved in the value-added process? What does this change? What is the change for machine manufacturers? Well, there's a lot of dynamism and a certain interchangeability of those. And it's going to be a challenge for machine manufacturers and actors in this value-added process to really explain and renew, justify, and very exactly describe the benefit and the added value that they deliver to customers. Well, Mr. Maier, can you confirm that there are, palpable impacts on your business because of these changed value-added chains? And what does this look like? Well, I think the reasons are diverse, but the impact that we can feel is that our work has become much more complex, and this complexity is increasing even more. And if I do not only think about ourselves or our customers, but also about our own suppliers, I can say that they come from Europe, they come from Asia, they come from Brazil. So metal cutting takes place in all kinds of different places. The final assembly takes place all over the world. And digitalization has become a necessity if you work with such a network. Because what you need is transparency. You need to be able what's going on the timeline when it comes to stock levels. So you need this information all the time. So we can feel it as a manufacturer. And of course, derived from there, we know that our customers have actually the same challenge. And sometimes this challenge is to the power of 10. And that, of course, is quite a challenge. Professor Weigold, you said that we should no longer talk about value-added chains, but about value-added networks. Can you fill this statement with a little more life? What are these networks about? Well, these networks and are, and also this transformation from the perspective of a producing company or from the perspective of a supplier to production. And no, what I say is that the product-centered value-added model is changing disruptively. So, in the past, it was at the beginning of a process of purchasing a machine, there were specifications, and then the specifications were tuned with the supplier or between the supplier and the customer. So the value added was placed at the beginning of this phase, but this will change. We will see this happening throughout the entire process, which means that the machine manufacturer and also the suppliers, they will have to act not only at the early stage of the purchasing process, but throughout the entire purchasing process. So these paradigms will shift a lot. It's not that we are not there yet, but I think there will be a further shift. So there will be interaction throughout the entire process, throughout all phases. Well, maybe I have a good story for that. The senior boss of one of our customers, he told me in a leisurely conversation, he said, my customers always lie to me. Either they say, of this gearbox housing I need 500,000, and then at the end of the day it's only 150,000. Or they tell me, I need 200,000, and at the end of the day it's 400,000. So they always lie to me. And this gentleman has been in the business for 60 years. And he said, in the past it was easier. But then I challenged him and I asked him, what has changed? And then it turns out, in the past, it was 3 types of gearbox housings that he manufactured or used to manufacture. Now it's 30 types. In the past, he had 5 customers delivered to 5 countries, and now it's 50 customers, and he's got to deliver globally. So customers have very individual demands, and this results in a lot of complexity for you. And of course, predictability is much harder. Your predictions will not be correct. Things change. So you know, it's a planning process which, you know, it's, you know, a linear or static planning process no longer exists. I mean, Corona, of course, contributes towards that, but it simply shows that this kind of change disturbs everything. And the predictability of requirements is becoming even more difficult. And, you know, the only good answer is that you've got to stay, you know, remain in a communication mode with your customer. Always communicate. Professor Weigold, how or to what extent is the German economy involved in these value-added networks on a global, on a worldwide basis? Well, the German economy is strongly anchored in the global economy. You can see this by means of the export figures, and we're still in the lead. And we have got to resort to our technical expertise. This German technical expertise is leading in the world. And if you combine this with specialization and diversification, because Mr. Maier said it, customers want to become more individual. This is a trend that will continue. And these technological competencies are there. This skill, this expertise is there. We can also diversify. But now, these skills, this expertise has to be combined with data analysis. And we mustn't lose sight of our core competencies. But we still need to address these new topics. And I've also described this here. There is a great opportunity in a European solution. I'm sure we're going to talk about this in the further course of this panel now. We've got the leading nations, China and the US, when it comes to data. But we need to focus on our strengths, but still remain open to these other topics and find answers to these questions as well. Yes, it was an intention to also talk about political developments and how they affect value-added networks. And one issue that has been addressed a lot in the recent past is protectionism, trade barriers. Mr. Maier, have you already felt specific impacts of protectionism in your day-to-day business? Well, if you look back in history, you know, Heller has been in the business for more than 40 years. And we went to Brazil 40 years ago. Why did we go there? Well, because of customs duties. Our customers went there and they said, you know, you have to come with us so that we can save on customs duties. And this is an increasing trend. There's an increasing pressure, for example, to buy American or America first. And then on the other hand, you have the Asian market or the Chinese market. They don't spell it out, but it is an economy that is trying to establish its own machine tool industry. And of course, they want to get this going so that some 4-axis machine will receive tariffs so that there will always be a preference to manufacture it domestically. Now, this is, of course, this is going to be a fact. But then, on the other hand, for example, a plant manager in the US can deliver parts from US production, and then there's another supplier who supplies from Europe. same cost, same quality, but then it is an emotional decision for this plant manager to give preference to the American manufacturer. Now, as HELLER, with our production sites in Europe, in North America, in South America, and also in China, we have a possibility to provide local content. Nevertheless, I'd say, of course, we don't want to see a rise in protectionism, because for us as HELLER, for Germans, for the German market, it is very important that international trade continues without barriers, without tariffs. And the things that are going on there, already without Corona, but now with Corona, all this is just disturbing, and it makes our life difficult. And then things such as export control. If, as Europeans, we get caught between the two economic superpowers, US and China, and it may happen that there are contracts saying that if it turns out that, for example, with a Chinese customer, any content in the machine originates from US production, they can cancel the order. Now, that, of course, is a huge burden, or would be a huge burden, and will be a problem for us. So, of course, it is something that we want to see. We want to see this normalized. But, of course, we always need to address these things and be able to respond. Now, as a current topic, does it make a difference that now Joe Biden was elected next president of the US? Now, will this change the fundamental conflict between the US and China? Well, the struggle for economic dominance in the world, maybe including military and political supremacy, is not dependent on any specific president in the US. Of course, there are maybe different ways and means of dealing with it, but one of them shouts out America first, the other one may just think it, but still act accordingly. So the trend of putting yourself first or putting your own country first, that's a simple trend. Now, both of you emphasized the importance of a European stance in order to avoid a situation where we get caught between these major superpowers. You said a European stance would be the only way of moving forward. Now, if we look at the political Europe, there are enormous centrifugal forces at the moment, and they seem to be stronger than the intention to accomplish goals together and jointly. So how do you want to get to such a joint European stance? Now, of course, if you want to find a consensus of 24 states, it's going to be rather difficult. And there are strong economies, such as Germany and a few others in Europe, and they need to move ahead. They must set the course. Now, we need some independence, not creating isolation or some island. We need to create our own network. And this can be successful if some core countries move ahead and are courageous in moving forward. And one example of this approach is the sovereign data platform, Gaia-X, initiated by Germany and France. Now, that is a great example of moving forward together. Now, you could have said, we've already lost the competition. If you look at hyperscale in the USA and China. But you could also say, if we don't try it now, we will lose anyway, so let's try it. And I think it's a good approach. it can be successful, but I agree with you. Finding a consensus between all countries first and wait until then, until you can move forward, that's not a solution. Yes, I completely agree. As Germans, as Europeans, we need to think even, take it back to the beginning, not about these platforms, but, simple things such as what does the data port look like, or what are some of the data formats that we want to use, such as the UMATI interface. So I completely agree with you. If we want to wait until everybody comes around a table and then take a decision, it will never happen. So we need to move forward, maybe strike out on our own or with 2 or 3 other nations, with 2 or 3 other countries. Because otherwise, a few years down the road, no matter whether in control systems, in data formats or data interfaces, we will get told by China what to do. And from the West, the US will tell us what to do. And then we need to do both and meet both requirements. And then there will be a third version, a European version, and we will be the losers. So we need to get together with the control manufacturers who are around here in Europe. So get together with them, define things, find common benefits, because then maybe China and the US will adapt to that. Well, coming back to the situation you talked about, both of you talked about the digital area. You talked about platform economies. Both the US and China are ahead of us. And you said, as Germany or Europe, we master domain knowledge more than that. But yeah, you mentioned Gaia X. Is it just like whistling in the dark, or how do you see that? I mean, how can we be competitive? And is there any ideas right now? What do we address now? Are there any examples, also maybe from the point of view of academia? And can you tell us whether there are any promising projects? Well, in fact, we're working on a joint project in terms of Gaia X. It is actually a specific project. Gaia X is a very recent, is a very young platform. And from our point of view, from production, we need to become more specific and do some research and see where the limits are. And I think that's a great approach to get together as partners and do that research. Now, how can we stand out in this platform economy, in these digital business models that are emerging right now? I believe, and I look forward to Mr. Maier's opinion, I think one of our topics must be sustainability. When it comes to sustainability, we can differentiate, we can stand out from the US, from China, because I think the awareness for sustainability is different in Germany, is different in the EU, in Europe. And we've seen how disruptive this way of thinking was, for example, for the car industry. And if you look at energy consumption in Germany, on an annual basis, it was 2,500 terawatt-hours in Germany. 750 of these are from industry, and the same proportion comes from transport. Now, do you understand what I'm saying? The topic that's being discussed intensely, maybe a little too intensely, and that is transport. Now, I think from the point of view of industry, we should also make a contribution. So sustainable manufacturing And if we can find a model which is sustainable beyond 2030, then I think that would be promising. I'm sure 5 years ago, no machine tool manufacturer would have thought about energy consumption or that this plays a role. But I think in the wake of CO2 reduction targets, things have changed. These are ideas that come from academia, maybe also from politics, but I think we have to deal with them. Now, I'm really interested in what Mr. Maier says, because, of course, there are two things, and that is creating a production system that is CO2 neutral, and on the other hand, your business caters very much to the internal combustion engine. And then there, of course, there's regulation and policies. Now, how do you see the situation, Mr. Maier? Now, you see, I'm a father of 3, and they are between 20 and 32 years old. And this is why I can feel, really personally, that the next generation is worried about the CO2 emissions, about the Earth, and that things have to change. We can all perceive that the climate is changing to the negative. So the insight that CO2 emissions have to be reduced is there, and Europe is leading the way here as compared to China and the US. So that is one thing. The other thing, and you already mentioned it, the transport, individual transport, if we take a look at that, then unfortunately, from my point of view, engineering is not the focus. What is in the focus are political statements, and they are very often not based on engineering knowledge. So the politicians dictate the course, and maybe these policies do not even contribute towards CO2 reduction. And the same is true for industry. There are things we must do, and whenever there's regulation, whenever there are requirements, we shouldn't see the negative side to that. We should look at the opportunities associated with that. And we are responsible to do something, that is clear, and this means we also have to look at the opportunities. As machine tool manufacturers, we shouldn't become too emotional or statements that sell well. We should focus on rational considerations, facts that can be verified, and move in that direction. Now, it's an advantage for us Europeans that we should actually turn into our advantage, our benefit, and use it in business models. So we do this, for example, in HELLER 4, when we do the monitoring of energy consumption, or, for example, when do you switch off hydraulics, when do you switch off the cooling lubricant system. So these things are really palpable, and we do that, and we need to do more about that. But I think it's something that's got to be overarching for the entire production, and we need to work with our customers on that. And I think the notion that we have to do something in the field of CO2, in the field of sustainability, and then actually do that and move forward and be the pioneers. I think that would make a lot of sense. Now, what does this mean for the HELLER portfolio? Do you think it will change? Will you produce different machines for different parts? Will there be new business segments? Any strategic decisions ahead? Now, if we look at the current situation, the stagnation in capital investments in powertrain, in light-duty passenger cars is caused, amongst other things, by the CO2 discussion, the demonization of the internal combustion engine. And of course, this is something that affects us directly. It's a stagnation in investments, or our customers do not invest in the long term. And it means that we must make up for the powertrain potential that we lose by addressing other areas and fetch the potential there. It means that we have got to focus on other industries, not so much individual mobility. So we've got to tap into the potential elsewhere. And of course, we should not stick our head in the sand, but we need to compensate for that business actively. And it's a stony path, but I think it doesn't help. Just like with Corona, you know, we should not, as I said, stick our head in the sand. We need to address the problems and, you know, address these challenges. Well, that's exactly the reason why we're here today, right? Now to you, another question, Professor Weigold. We talked about digitalization, we talked about sustainability, and very briefly, we also talked about protectionism and tariffs. Now, against this backdrop, what are the recommendations on the part of science and research? Now, yes, we covered a lot of things already. And maybe we can look at this here once again on the slide, because I've prepared this for you, some hypotheses. What are some of the recommendations that we can make? We already talked about the transformation, also intangible production factors. I mean, as an example of machine tool manufacturers, I cannot speak on behalf of HELLER, but in the entire industry, the question is raised, how can concepts be developed, for example, for billing models, not the one-off investment, and also not leasing the way we know it today, but, for example, how can we bill based on stress, stress-driven billing, for example? So, who is putting the most stress on the part, on the equipment? Now, I think these are models that should be analyzed, and we believe that there are opportunities. Now, if somebody has difficulties making investments, maybe new models can help. And as academia, as research and science, we can help and contribute towards that. And this third aspect that I've covered here on the slide, innovation driven by openness and cooperation. Mr. Maier mentioned it. The system is becoming more and more complex. And a company just on its own will not be able to master this network. We need partnerships, we need cooperation. Mr. Maier also mentioned this. We need to create standards, but our cooperation patterns have to change. We need legal certainty. We need trust. Co-innovation is a catchword, or open innovation. This is something, you know, that we're testing in experimental settings. And I think we have to just say, you know, we have these models. These models are future-proof, or they are promising. Like, for example, when it comes to the training of workers, whether it's machine operators or electronics technicians. These training courses, this vocational training, has to be characterized by cooperation, by openness. And I can see this here at HELLER. And this is something that we also have to implement in our business processes. And it's not easy. But I think it's one of my recommendations, because we can see that in other industries, open innovation works pretty well. But the question is, can it work for production? Can it work for the manufacturing industry? Well, can it, Mr. Maier? Well, I think so, yes. You mentioned it earlier on. If we take all this seriously, and if we say, you know, we as Germans, we have a lot of, you know, we have profound expertise in machine tools. But we cannot just rest on this experience and think that it carries us into the future. We need to be creative. And we need to be open for new things without throwing everything in the past overboard. And this challenge begins at the schools, in vocational training departments, at the universities. And this notion, this idea, and actually that I studied is quite a while ago, a few decades ago. And the professor asked the question, who was the last universal genius? So we didn't have the right answer. He said, and it is still true today, it was Leonardo da Vinci, more than 500 years ago. Since then, there was nobody who actually knew everything, had all the knowledge of his or her time. Now, as companies and as a country, we need to understand that in order to produce universal knowledge for the future, we need cooperation, we need joint projects, we need an exchange, creativity, and everything needs to be put together. And I think that is something that we practice here at HELLER, starting when people come to us as apprentices in training. And if a machine operator works on a machining center after 3 years of training, which already costs $1 million without the tools, now in the rack, there are tools worth another $500,000, plus the fixtures and workpieces themselves. Now then, this person has a huge responsibility, an invest of $2 million. And then you become aware of the fact that there are sometimes engineers sitting at their desks that may have less responsibility than the worker, the machine operator working on his machine. So I believe that maybe things have to change a little in terms of how we value the jobs some people do, and maybe also something in the hierarchies may change. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. And I would like to know now whether there are questions in the chat, Ines. No questions in the chat right now. So let me use the last few minutes to ask a few final questions. Now, it was very impressive how you also, told us about HELLER and what would have to happen in order to make all this work. What is your opinion about the sentiment, the climate in the German industry? Do people understand what is necessary? Well, is the understanding there? Does everybody understand in the German industry? Well, certainly not. Otherwise, I think things would be completely different. But I can say that people were sensitized let's say, over the last 12, 18 months. It has become clearer. We are now much more aware of the fact that things can change pretty quickly and that we need answers quickly and swiftly as well. Now, we have a lot of experience, we have a lot of expertise here, but we haven't fully understood that there's also data-based knowledge. And if we should be successful to bring these two worlds together and find the strengths in both worlds, because data-based knowledge alone, is not the sorcerer's stone. We've got to combine it with experience-based knowledge. And we need to recall that there may be new ideas, and if we learn from what's happening in our daily practice, in our daily work, both in the, on the administrative floors as well as on the shop floor, then if we come back here 5 years from now, I think we will be able to see completely new processes. Mr. Maier, you also looked at HELLER and told us about HELLER, but you also know competitors and you also know your customers. You know what's going on in the German industry. Now, is this awareness there? And is the intensity that people work on new solutions enough? Now, if I talk on behalf of the industry, I dare say that there are good examples. Companies and individuals have faced up to the challenge and addressed the challenge. But I'm sure that there are also examples where people rely on old strengths, do not open up to the new challenges. Now, we celebrated the 125th anniversary at HELLER last year. But although we're already 125 years old, we are absolutely aware of these new challenges. And, we have to say that it is not the strongest or the most intelligent species that survives, but the fittest in the sense of the one that best adapts. Otherwise, the dinosaurs would still be around. So that's a good metaphor, I think. We at HELLER have understood this, and also other companies. So adaptability to change is the most important skill. Humans are creatures of habit, so you may not want to change, but, we've got to face up to that. Well, thank you very much. I hope that at the latest 5 years down the road, we talk about new solutions and new approaches that have been brought underway since then. So I think it was a very interesting discussion, and we've seen that there is an awareness for change, but working on these solutions is a tricky challenge as well. Well, there's a question in the chat. Oh, yes, please. So one of our users asks, do you see a chance that academia can reflect on the maybe questionable decisions that governments have made regarding CO2 emission standards and hopefully intervene correctively? Well, question to me, right? I kind of anticipated this. Yes. Please go ahead, and I hope you're going to make it very clear. Well, yes, we are in close exchange with politicians and with funding bodies. There is an awareness, that some corrections are necessary here and there. And what is very clear is that there is a strong pressure coming from society, and that is a signal that I receive, and it gives rise to hope. All right. I think that's a wrap, as we say. Thank you very much for these interesting insights. Now, you may have seen that there are numerous roundtables also on the HF1 and Heller Services interface. So please register for these roundtables because the number of participants is limited. And at 1 o'clock we will continue here. And the new generation of the 5-axis machining center HF will be presented. So please stay tuned. So, next we will have lunch. Many of you may have received the parcel from Heller, and we also have a DJ here. You can post any songs that you would like to hear. So I hope you enjoy your lunch break, and then we'll see you again in the afternoon.